Talking about is China. China is slowly chipping away now at the U.S. dollar, trying to replace the U.S. dollar with the yuan. Now, in the near
And the dollar has been taking record hits in value as the world's second largest economy, China, is slowly cutting off ties with the United States. And if history teaches us anything, the past 500 years we have seen world economic powers rotate every 100 years. And as the US dollar approaches its 90th birthday as the king of the world currency, people are asking the question, is this the start of the fall of the US dollar? So today let's talk about what is happening, why it's happening, and is this something that you should be concerned about? After all, the US dollar is the most widely used currency in the world. My name's Austin, so if you wouldn't mind giving the video a like for the YouTube algorithm, it'd be very much appreciated. But let's begin by talking about dollars, baby. The dollar has been the world's official currency for international trade for years, specifically since 1940s when 44 countries came together to form the Bretton Woods Agreement. These countries came together at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to create a new monetary system. After all, World War II had just ended, and before this there was not a good international monetary system that countries could use and carry out transactions with at least some stability. And during this time, the US was backed by the gold standard. The gold standard was a system that ensured the dollars in circulation by holding physical gold at the Federal Reserve. This made the United States currency, the dollar, an incredibly safe investment, because if there was $1,000 circulating in the economy, then there would be $1,000 worth of gold sitting somewhere as an insurance policy in case the worst were to happen. Well, the other 43 countries in this agreement realized the stability of the dollar and chose to make the dollar their reserve currency. So the US holds gold as a reserve because it's so safe. Well, these other countries hold the dollar as a reserve because it is also safe, because it's backed by the gold. This little loop is what caused the US dollar to be the king of currencies. At this point, the dollar was the most desirable currency to trade in because everyone knew how safe it was and it wasn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Unlike the German mark, the US dollar wasn't as susceptible to inflation because of that gold backing as a tangible asset. But eventually, during the Nixon era, the gold standard was dropped because there wasn't enough physical gold there to actually back up all the dollars that were out in circulation. But the US dollar still remains as a go-to currency for countries to pick, making the dollar still currently king of currency. After all, nearly half of global trade is actually billed and invoiced in US dollars. This gives the US an extraordinary amount of power, and it helps the US avoid exchange rate risk altogether. Exchange rate risk is the risk that an investor, business, or individual may face because they have to make a payment or receive money in a foreign currency. Because most countries do business in US dollars, the United States doesn't have to worry about any exchange rates, well, for the most part, and that's why the price they see is the price that we get. Versus exchanging like the Australian dollar or the Japanese yen, volatility is all over the place. In a deal that takes several days, the exchange rate could actually change quite significantly, and it's going to probably benefit one side more than the other. But arguably more important is the control of the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is a global financial messaging system, and it allows banks and institutions to securely exchange electronic messages and financial transactions with each other. If that sounded a little bit confusing, you can think of it as a giant Venmo system. Instead of person to person, the system is almost World Bank to World Bank. This system is responsible for about 35 million transactions every day, making it the largest global banking messaging system. The size of this system is why it's so important to remain in control of the system. Right now, the US and the G10 countries oversee the SWIFT system, and they can do this because the US dollar is the primary currency of the platform. And this is where the SWIFT system can become overpowering. When Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022, the United States put sanctions on Russia as a way to cut them off and hurt their economy as punishment. Well, one of the major sanctions the US put on Russia was cutting them off from the SWIFT system. This meant that Russia couldn't carry out its transactions, and most of its assets in the country were frozen. But if Russia used a bigger currency than just the US dollar, then we would not be able to cut them off as easily. They probably wouldn't be holding any assets in the dollar, and they most likely would have their own financial messaging system. But if they had a currency much bigger than the dollar, then there's a good chance that they would be the ones controlling a large portion of the world's transactions. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want Russia controlling the world's transactions. But I do know one country that really wants to be in control for good. That country is China. China has begun a campaign for the last several years to try to overthrow the US dollar. They're even suspected of trying to make their own currency, specifically a digital currency. People are even calling this campaign de-dollarization. Their main goal is to reduce the dollar's global dominance, and they believe that once they overthrow the dollar, they can bring in their new currency and have a disproportionate influence over the world economies. But who is that they I'm talking about? Well, they is a group of countries nicknamed in 2001 called the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, hence the acronym BRICS. Well, during the pandemic, there was a big shift, a shift in global GDP. For the first time ever, the BRICS countries, led by China, surpassed the GDP of the G7 nations that are led by the United States. This is the fear. The fear is when the BRICS countries are big enough that they do not need our own currency, the US dollar, for transactions, then why can't they start using their own currency? Well, if they start using their own currency, and they are doing most of the transactions in that currency, then it's not unreasonable for the BRICS countries to start requiring other countries to use the BRICS currency in order to do business with them. And at that point, that will be the fall of the American dollar. In the early 2000s, over 70% of global transactions were conducted in dollars, but since the early 2000s, that trend has been steadily decreasing to the point where only 60% of transactions are actually conducted in US dollars. And for the first time in history, Saudi Arabia has actually accepted Chinese yuan as currency of payment instead of the US dollar, showing us that the Saudis think the yuan is probably safe enough, or at least not that much more risky than the US dollar. See, before this, the Saudis would require all transactions to be carried out in dollars. Other nations have actually seen this trend too, and now they think it's wise to start unloading some of their balance sheets from the US dollar. Peter Schiff says, "It is clear that many countries are trying to minimize their exposure to the dollar. Confidence in the greenback continues to erode thanks to prolific borrowing, spending, and money creation by the United States government." So he's essentially worried that the United States has been recklessly spending and has taken away value from the dollar, making other countries motivated to find a different currency to replace it. After all, what I think is a crazy statistic is that 80% of US dollars in existence were printed between January of 2020 and October of 2021. But anyway, my thoughts on the situation. I tend to not be as pessimistic as Peter Schiff, but I do recognize that US spending post-pandemic has been unsustainable by far. But also those within the US government and specifically the Federal Reserve understand that too. While the Fed has been increasing interest rates, a byproduct of that is actually decreasing the US money supply. So those dollars that were put in existence during the pandemic are actually slowly being taken back out. It's this self-awareness of our own currency that is crucial to keep the dollar alive. But let's say other countries want to ditch the dollar, they think it's too risky, and they're just ready to leave. Okay, great. What are they going to move to? The Chinese yuan? Well, the developed countries will probably understand that China has a history of lying and manipulating numbers, so I think the chances are slim. Plus, the yuan only accounts for about 2.7% of the global transactions. And especially since about 60% of global transactions are actually invoiced in US dollars, there's really no competition. And since there's no really good alternative, I don't think the dollar is really under that much pressure. And I don't really see a good reason to be concerned. Since the US dollar is still number one by far, I believe the dollar will remain as the world's reserve currency. And right now, the only reason we're even talking about this issue is because social media is hyping it up and allegedly that there's more problems than there really are. They're giving you this story, but they're not giving you much context to it. Once countries really start using another currency to actually start doing a majority of their world's transactions, then we can start to have the conversation. But right now, we don't even know if this is gonna happen in our lifetime. Now I want to say thank you. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you learned something. These type of videos do take a lot of research, so liking the video to help educate more people would be very, very much appreciated. And if you want some free stocks, my link below is to sign up for Webull. You get some free stocks with that. My name is Austin, and I will see you in the next video.